Welcome, everyone. This is a webinar jointly hosted by the UN Ocean Decade Program's Blue Food. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Blue Food Futures, FishSCORE, Supreme, SmartNet, FishMIP, and Project Becky, which we're going to hear more about today. And this webinar series highlights current efforts and challenges at the climate fisheries nexus. Presentations and discussions will range from data-driven efforts to better understand oceanographic and biological challenges affecting fisheries, how the results can be used to inform fisheries management, aquaculture, and sustainable food decisions, to the many ways people and broader communities are being impacted by and adapting to the changes in marine ecosystems and marine resource use. This is being recorded and will be up later for people to peruse and share as they would like. And I'll also add that there is a link in the chat that Claire's putting in that has lots more details about all of the different co-sponsors of this effort. And I believe our next webinar is going to be in January after the holidays. So we'll look forward to that, and we'll announce that in the coming weeks. So today we have two speakers. Myself, I'm going to go second, and I'm talking about a new project that doesn't have an acronym yet. We've been working on. We haven't figured it out. And Viv Tulloch is going to talk about Becky, which is a project she's leading. And the two projects we're talking about today have a lot of synergy, and they're both really focused on how do we translate climate models to fisheries management. So that's the theme for today. And so welcome, everyone. I'm kind of like stringing this out because I'm realizing it's only 1:03 and people are still finding their way here. But yeah, so Viv, why don't you get your slides up and you can introduce yourself a bit.
Yeah, we can drag it out for another couple of minutes. I can wax lyrical about who I am.
Yeah, and Viv has driven across the land to find power during a big cyclone event there in Victoria, Vancouver Island. So bravo for that.
Yep. I spent the morning looking for generators, people with generators, so that I could actually run a computer. So that was fun. But we have liftoff. So I found the one person that I know that has power in the Cowichan Valley, which is exciting. And please excuse me, my 3-year-old is home because everything's shut. So if he comes and jumps on my lap, that's just how it's got to be. So thanks, Cheryl, for that great introduction. Cheryl is wonderful, and we've been starting to collaborate on a bunch of stuff together, and it's very exciting. I am talking today about a project that we've been developing as part of the Basin Scale Events and Coastal Impact project. I just want to check, can you guys see my screen okay? There's nothing blocking it. It's all good. Okay, great.
Your bar at the bottom, of all of the things is up, but it's not. There you go. You got it.
Okay, great. We're good. Okay, excellent. Yeah, I'm just doing a streamlined thing at the moment, so I haven't got all my screens up. So this is anyway, great. So yeah, as I was saying, I am a project scientist on the Basin Scale Events and Coastal Impact project. And this is a relatively new project. It's been around for a couple of years, but I'm a new analyst on the project since about April this year. And I'm a decision scientist and ecological modeler by background. And so I generally work on the intersection of multiple stresses, including climate change, and how we can address those climate, multiple stressor, multiple pressure issues in the marine environment and predict robust impacts of climate change on fisheries and conservation objectives. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the initiatives that the Basin Scale Events and Coastal Impacts Project is developing, which is a North Pacific Ocean Marine Ecosystem Model Ensemble, or NOMEME, and we do have a fancy acronym for it, and that's only because I shamelessly stole it from my colleague Kieran Murphy, who has developed a SOMEME for the Southern Ocean, and as part of FishMIP. So he graciously allowed me to steal it for the North Pacific, and we're rolling with it. I think we're ready to roll on, hey? Great. So the impetus for this work, we all know that climate change is happening. It's significantly impacting the world's oceans, marine resources. And so the impetus for this work is modeling that's taking place around the globe and the need to understand the impact of climate change on marine systems and scope the actions we need to mitigate impacts to sustain fish and resources. And we know that there are fish stock declines projected. This map here on the bottom, we've all seen this map from NOAA that is showing anomalies of sea surface trends compared to baseline around the 1980s, 1990s. And so we've seen these maps. We see regions that are getting much warmer compared to the baseline temperature. But there's huge variability in predictions and projections and impacts and our knowledge of impacts. And there's large uncertainties as well in how these climate impacts are interacting with fishing and how they will interact in the future with fishing and management strategies and harvest regimes. And as I said, we're already seeing the impact on fish and fish stocks. This figure here on the right is by a fabulous report by Julia Blanchard and the mob at FishMIP on the Fisheries Intercomparison project. And that they've looked at both regional and global predictions of climate change on large marine ecosystem models, using large marine ecosystem models, and what the change in exploitable fish biomass might be under different climate scenarios. We've got SSP 26 and then SSP 585. Sorry. So as we can see from these maps as well, there's not just uncertainty in what we think is going to happen, but also uncertainty in the projected climate scenarios and how those emissions trajectories are going to impact our fish stocks. So we need to account for all this uncertainty. And that's one of the things we're trying to do at the Basin Scale Events to Coastal Impacts project. As I said, it's relatively new, and the mission is to provide researchers and decision makers with actionable information to support climate-informed decisions, both for fisheries and conservation, species of conservation importance. It's a multinational interdisciplinary project, and it's based on advanced transdisciplinary ocean and climate change science. And so it's a small team at the moment. We're hoping to expand, and we're collaborating with some big giants in the realm already. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. The main goals of the project are to coordinate international efforts and assemble a lot of the information that's currently happening in the North Pacific to assess climate-driven impacts on transboundary and common fishery resources across the North Pacific. And sorry, I should have said the scope for Becky is just the North Pacific Ocean at this point. And that's sort of the area here on the map. These are sort of some of the broad LME areas that have been defined that Pisces operates in and that we're sort of operating in as well. We're hoping using models to improve predictions of climate-driven changes and then also support sustainable decisions under climate change using a range of tools. And so that's where I come in my background in ecological modeling and spatial prioritization, a whole bunch of stuff. We are forming some big international collaborations with some of the bigwigs that are already working in this realm, and also engaging with RFMOs to help guide some of the objectives and scenarios that we're planning to run with. And I'm already formulating a lot of the predictive modeling research plans that use a whole toolbox of approaches. So it's not just ecological models, but statistical models, qualitative models. We also might be leaning on expert elicitation. So we're going to have a whole toolbox of approach approaches to answering the questions that we're looking at. And it's all sort of couched in a decision science framework. I'm not going to go into the weeds of this today. I'm just going to talk about one of the projects that we're working on, which is the NOMEME. And the NOMEME, like Cheryl said, is it's really couched in trying to address climate change impacts on fish and fish species and fisheries, in this whole realm of uncertainty, and making sure that we're coupling to the stuff that we need to in terms of environmental drivers. So as I'm sort of harkening back to that first slide that I was talking about, there's a lot of variability and uncertainty in climate change impacts. And I think Cheryl gave a really great discussion on this, I think maybe a couple of seminars back now. And she talked about Ryan Hennigan's paper from 2021, which really is sort of another output of FishMIP as well, but it really goes into the weeds of showing how hard it is to predict impacts robustly, and where the variability, or where at least spatially, where the variability is in some of the large marine ecosystem models that we're using based on how they're structured. But also there's one of the big issues in linking climate change impacts, managing these impacts, is that predictions differ depending on the climate models we're using to drive our information, the way we read in climate information in predictive models, the RCP scenarios that we're using to predict temperature change, as well as the ecosystem models and how they're structured. So all of this is, combining. We've got lots of spatial variability, lots of temporal variability. It's really hard to make decisions under all this uncertainty, and it's hard for decision makers to figure out, what do we need to know to actually, help inform what, moving forward, how we manage fish stocks, species. So then we get stagnation, delays in implementing science into climate-ready management because of all this uncertainty. So we really need to reduce this uncertainty and improve reliability predictions, both for our knowledge of how things are going to change, as well as for informing decisions. And so multi-model approaches or ensembles of models are a really robust way of getting at some of these uncertainties, to compare how things might change under different scenarios of climate, and just reduce some of this variability and uncertainty in either spatially and how we think the world works, or how we're predicting the things are going to change, so that we can more reliably predict what's going to happen and inform decisions. And there's a really urgent need for this sort of stuff, that for models that can robustly detect past and project future ecosystem changes and risks to services for people and for making decisions. So that's where this project comes in. And so there's a lot of people that are sort of working in this realm at the moment, and we are hoping to contribute to this vast amount of knowledge by building a North Pacific multi-model ensemble, or NOMEME, as it shall forever be known. And so this NOMEME, or Marine Ecosystem Model Ensemble, multi-model ensemble, however you want to call it, is coupled to Earth system models. So the outputs of Earth system models, like temperature, the climate information that we're, thinking and that we know is going to change in the future and has already changed, to inform transboundary fisheries management. So what's happening for these species that are moving across boundaries, political boundaries, management boundaries, and focusing at the moment on a Northeast Pacific, and I'll explain, and you'll see in a second why that is, but outlining a protocol for expansion to the Northwest Pacific, because as you saw, the Becky project is focused on this larger basin area across the North Pacific. So we're really hoping to address these sort of basin scale issues, as well as, down at the coastline as well, where there's a little bit more work already in this realm. So, as I said, we shamelessly stole this NOMEME from Kieran, and he's very happy for us to use it. And he actually gave a great presentation on his NOMEME just, I think, 1 or 2 webinars back. And there's a recording of that if anyone wants to go into that on the FishSCORE website. We're building a little from this and diverging a little from his process. But essentially, one of the cruxes of this project is to bring together ecosystem and population and stock modelers, researchers, practitioners in the North Pacific who understand the climate fisheries landscape, and they can guide objectives, scenarios, initiatives, and contribute to sort of this larger collaborative work. Part of the project that I've been working on already that we've started to tick off is a review of the modelling tools, approaches, and initiatives that are currently operational within the North Pacific specifically, that incorporate or have the capacity to incorporate the effect of climate change on fisheries management and fisheries, on ecosystems and species across the North Pacific. And so the next stage of this is to bring all of this stuff together to develop a protocol for combining these disparate ensembles, including new scenarios, and this, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Working with Cheryl, we're working to identify using skill assessment tools and also her brain, the appropriate environmental forcing variables and models for the North Pacific. And there's global models, there's regionally downscaled models. We have to figure out what's appropriate for the region that we're looking at, to account for the range of uncertainty that we know and don't know. And then we're using new ensemble simulations to address the knowledge gaps that we have for our largely transboundary but fish species. And the idea is, we're bringing this all together at the Northeast Pacific, like I said. Hopefully we can make something that's some general rules of thumb that we can use for expansion Northwest Pacific. And the reason for that, sorry, my slides got a little bit swapped around, but I'll just quickly touch on why we're using ecosystem models and why we're focusing on ecosystem models. And it's not just because I like building ecosystem models. They're actually really hard. I'd much prefer to just do stats. But it's because marine ecosystem models are really well matched to the scale at which climate is operating. We need to understand how species are operating. That we've moved from this single species focus that has traditionally been used in fisheries management, in conservation. We're moving from that. I wouldn't say we've moved, but we're definitely moving, because marine ecosystem models, they help us understand impacts of human activities, natural phenomena, climate change. They help us understand how food webs and ecological interactions, the importance of these, within both the system and on our fish and fisheries. And these models have the capacity to include and address complex interactions, and that's really important. Fish aren't existing on their own in the marine environment. There's so much stuff happening all around. We really need to capture that. And like I said, it's really important to capture this at the scale at which climate is operating. Climate is not happening at very local scales. Impacts are happening, but the drivers are happening at much vaster scales. And really importantly as well, UNDOS, UN Decade of Ocean Science, they're on the bandwagon. They're highlighting the need to deploy these complex mechanistic spatial temporal models to engage policymakers and society into these dialogues towards sustainably managed oceans. So it's not just a fun tool to play with, it's actually really meaningful. And we're building from these big giants already who have been developing ensembles in the marine realm. So we've got FishMIP that we've already heard a little bit about last couple of seminars ago, from Kelly Ortega Cisneros and from Kieran Murphy. And FishMIP, we're not starting from scratch. FishMIP have done a huge bulk of the work at a global scale, and they've also done some regional scale work as well in using standardized climate inputs to enable robust comparison and quantification of uncertainty. And so FishMIP is this a global project. I won't talk too much about it because we've heard quite a bit about it in previous seminars, but Julia Blanchard and others are leading this fisheries marine ecosystem modeling intercomparison project. God, I hope I said that right. And it's ecosystem models coupled to Earth system models. It's a global project. They're trying to project long-term impacts of climate change on fisheries and marine ecosystems using ensembles. And they've got a range of regional models as well that they're working with, and we're going to be sort of leaning into some of these as well with our NOMEME. As you can see in the North Pacific, sorry, I haven't got my little pointer because I'm working off a laptop, but you can, oh, maybe you can see that. You can see that there's a little bit of work already here in the Northeast Pacific, not much happening in the Northwest yet with FishMIP. We're also building on work that's happening with NOAA and CEFI, which is the Climate Change Ecosystem Fisheries Initiative. And there's some just guns in this group. There's a huge project, lots and lots of modelers working on this. It's a regional project with models based in the Alaska region, West Coast Pacifics that are relevant to North Pacific model that we're working on. And it's using more downscaled models rather than these large global marine Earth system models, that FishMIP use to look at how different combinations of models in the regions are able to project biomass or fish stocks under climate change. And they again use standardized climate information and inputs. And there's a really great need to use this standardized information. We've already heard about that from previous seminars. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just trying to bring together the pieces of the puzzle from ACLAM, from FishMIP, and really focus on this North Pacific region. So this is just some of the work we've done, the background work we've done already to highlight and identify the regional models that are operating in some, and we've got some global models as well. These are marine ecosystem models that have been developed either mostly by collaborators and some by myself, only a couple small ones, but there's a vast range of ecosystem models across the region, different objectives. Hi, yes, darling. Okay, she's upstairs. Go look for her. Sorry. And so, these models, a lot of them have been coupled to climate drivers. They're end-to-end models. There's risk-based models, size spectrum models, multi-species stock assessment models. They're all different, but they've got some underlying commonalities that we can use to start teasing out, what are the impacts of X, Y, Z scenarios on fish stocks and important species. How can we manage them at transboundary scales to make sure that we're making sure that we're meeting management targets for these species and make sure that then they're going to persist in the future under climate change. So, and there's obviously gaps. There's very obvious gaps as well. We can see that there's quite a lot of work happening in the Northeast Pacific, Northwest Pacific. There's less work in this realm, and it's not to say that they're not working in this realm. They are working in this realm. They want to work in this realm, and I think that there's some lessons that can be learned from both sides as to how we can bring all this together for species that are operating at sort of these vast scales as well, like salmon, halibut, groundfish, forage fish, small pelagics. So the initial stage of this project is just to compare the outputs of these existing models, maybe run a few. I'm using some more standardized inputs, but most of them don't have standardized inputs as far as climate change and whatnot are concerned. So we're just having a look at, can we pull out some broad scale sort of functional indicator information like trophic information on small pelagics or consumers and predators, and have a look how that's predicted across the region under climate change for important functional groups. And so that's going to be using the models that we have at the moment. And there are a few more models that I haven't popped on this map, but that we're sort of getting collaborators to join us, but most of them are there at the moment. And what do we need? Where do we need to fill the gaps? And what do we need to do to fill those gaps? And so, using this sort of very generic comparative analysis at the start, we can start looking at relative proportional comparisons across the region. It doesn't really effectively address uncertainty because we're not using these standardized inputs, but it does get at some of the broad scale questions that we can then start hearkening into in the next stage of the project. And that is the nitty gritty of stage 2 and 3. I'm not going to go into in too much detail, but it's essentially following a lot of the protocols that FishMIP have developed and also that ACLIME and CEFI are working on and have been developing in the Alaska region. And so it's taking these regional models that all have different inputs. They might have, different variables that they're using to drive what's happening in the future, and instead getting those ones that where they have the capacity to at least to run some more robust historical calibrations to make sure that these models are all standardized. And then once we know that they're validated well and that they're matching our observations semi-correctly or as accurately as we can possibly get, using these to then run future projections, similar fishing scenarios, similar ecological forcing scenarios. So, using just one scenario from the IPCC and saying, what happens if we just reduce fishing? I know the fisheries managers don't like that, but what happens if we do that for 1 or 2? What happens if we just use a status quo of fishing? Assume that everything's running as it currently does. Where are the problems, and then where is the uncertainty in that? How much uncertainty is there in our future predictions, and how do we address that? So this is just sort of a dummy output of some of the examples that we could do for this stage. And this is sort of a protocol at the moment. So we're developing this. This isn't the final approach. And this is what we're, really leaning in on our modelers and folks like Cheryl as well. And to really help us guide this, and also our stakeholders, what are the scenarios that are really important to you to make sure that we're providing information that's going to be useful for decisions in the future. And so I'm up to my last couple of slides. How am I going for time? Blab it on. And this is so, just hearkening back to that original slide where we've got our components of Becky. This is a really important component that we're focused on at the moment is talking to our stakeholders and talking to folks in North Pacific that are actually making decisions and guiding management objectives, guiding management actions to guide our scenarios and our objectives for these models. And so, we know that we need to focus on transboundary species because they're not being well managed across multiple countries. We know that that's a problem, and we know that, help is needed or support is needed to make sure that these, we're not that we're addressing their needs at the scales at which they're operating. We've heard from the NPAFC, these are some of the RFMOs that we've been engaging with, that they want to be able to predict future salmon production and distribution. And salmon are moving these vast distances, from the US all the way up to Alaska and across as well. So, we need to be addressing that at the scales of which they're operating and moving. And the International Pacific Halibut Commission has also given us some very concrete objectives that they want help with in terms of integrating Earth system models and Earth system model information into stock assessments and the North Pacific Fish Commission. So this is all, on part of this iterative work that we're doing is also trying to manage this risk and uncertainty through these scenarios, as I was saying. And so there's a number of scenarios formats that we can do. And one of sort of the main reasons that we do this scenario planning is to be able to test strategies against possible future states, look at the best and worst cases under climate change, understand the impacts of recent decisions, understand risk. So be prepared and for future events and some things that black swan events, even things that we don't know are going to happen, but likely will happen, and then use these to address strategic and tactical management as well. And so I think this is, so this is just part of, risk management through scenario planning. That is part of Ensemble modeling approach in general. And I've already sort of talked about this, so I'm really not going to go into any more detail about this, but this is essentially a process. You lump in a whole bunch of Earth system models, climate variables like temperature from either global or downscaled regional products, depending on which ones are suitable for the region and for the species of interest. And that comes into an ensemble of multiple marine ecosystem models, and that can help get at this functional or structural uncertainty. We use portfolio modeling or risk to address the different scenarios, qualitative, strategic management. I should say quantitative. That is definitely not a qualitative scenario, SSP. And then we can look at the range of outcomes. How differently is biomass changing depending on the different scenarios that we have, and how can we manage that uncertainty? So maybe we look at the average of those outputs and say, well, under this particular scenario, we really need to set our harvest controls here to make sure that our biomass doesn't decline and past the point that it's not going to recover. So I'm not going to get into sort of the more tactical management, strategic management outputs at this point, because we're not there yet, but that's where we're headed. So the next steps, we've got this workshop, we've got ongoing collaborations with FishMIP, Cheryl, NOAA, Cefi, ACLIME, all the big wigs that are working in this already. And we've got an online discussion group that we're starting for Ensemble Ecosystem Model in North Pacific, and we're building community practice. So anyone that's interested that I haven't already reached out to, I'm trying to get to everyone, but I obviously haven't, please reach out to me. I'd love you to be involved. And if you've got any brainchilds that you want to share with me or stuff that you want to work on that we can perhaps help with, please reach out. This is us. I'm all done. Thanks for listening. And if you've got any questions, please let me know.
Thanks so much, Viv. And I'll just say to everyone that Viv and I planned for her to go a bit longer than me. So we're right on track for time, and we do have time for questions or comments. And while people are virtual clapping and that, I just want to say I'm so excited to be part of this fisheries modeling community at this time and developing this community of practice. I think it's really cool where we're going as a community, and I'm super excited about the future.
I'm excited too.
Yeah, we're excited. Okay,
so
so yeah, if you have a comment or a question, you want to raise your hand, or you want to put something in the chat, feel free. Nobody's doing it. I think it was pretty. It was a very clear talk. So if there's not any, I'll just say, so Viv will be on the chat if you want to chat with her right now. And there's her website information. And I think that we'll just keep going.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing. Yeah. And I just wanted to say this links really neatly into the stuff that Cheryl's doing. And I'm super excited for the stuff that Cheryl's doing as well. And I think we're just all building a super great community, and anyone's welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I'll stop sharing so that I'm going to turn my video off because I think the little one wants some cuddles.
Okay, so let's see if I can do this and not have an infinite loop of things and swap displays, and we'll get rid of that. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so my name is Cheryl Harrison. I am an assistant professor at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I'm working on a new project that is just getting off the ground with Howard Townsend. And if you know Howard, this is kind of a hilarious picture because he looks very, very serious. And he is one of the most easygoing guys I've ever met. And the idea is, and then the other person who's involved, who's a co-PI on this, is David Chigueras, and I think I'm saying his name right. He's at University of Florida in Gainesville, and he is EcoPath with EcoSim modeler extraordinaire who's worked a lot in translating those model outputs into fisheries management. And so what we're trying to do is really this infrastructure development piece that very much parallels what Viv was talking about and what Cefi's doing. And this is coming out of this national ecosystem modeling workshop effort that Howard runs for NOAA every year that brings together all the regional ecosystem fisheries modelers in the US. And then I'm a coordinator for FishMIP. I've been the Earth System model coordinator for a number of years, and moving into the regional modeling. And I know Kelly is on the call, so that's great. And it's just like, how do we move all this climate change stuff into the actionable regional scale? And how do we do that, for everyone, not just for Cefi's doing a great job doing the gold standard for a few regions, but how do we make it more general? Like, and how do we how do we do that? So that's the big question. And we're working on an acronym. We don't have one yet. I will also say this is the first talk I've given on this project, and I had AI help me a lot. I'm trying to learn how to use AI, so this will be fun. So my introduction. So as Viv put forward, as we all know, climate change is impacting marine ecosystems, fisheries, and the dependent communities, and that's accelerating. It's a nonlinear acceleration. And so there's critical need for tools to forecast ecosystem changes and adapt fisheries management. And as I think everyone on this call knows, like that's something that's really been a struggle. Fisheries management has not really been focusing on that. They don't have the tools to do that. So how do we develop those tools? And so the solution is then integrating climate and ecosystem models to inform management decisions. And I'm very much on the climate model side. So that's what I'm going to be focusing more on today. So I fed all that into AI and it gave me this image. And then I quickly like maxed out what you could do for free. But so this is climate, temperature changing, fisheries. I find these images a bit like what they call it, the uncanny valley. It's a bit unsettling. Like, what's up with the coastline of the Gulf of Mexico? What happened to Louisiana? And Florida got all pointy. I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, and here's another one, and it's having fun. Like, what is this word? I don't know what this word is. Okay, let me get my highlight laser pointer on. Like, what is that word? So the background is warming oceans, acidification, and habitat shifts threaten species distributions and ecosystem dynamics. And as Viv was touching on, it's this whole, species are moving around. How do we deal with that kind of thing? And right. And so current models are focusing on individual regions, and they last this cross-regional or national insight. And so how do we kind of bring everybody together? And we have to have this climate ready fisheries system. We have to integrate these climate models with these biological marine ecosystem fisheries models. Okay. I need to get on the right clicky thing. So the objectives of this project are fourfold. It's to determine the best practices for climate model use for ecosystem modeling. And that's the part I'm really focused on. That's the kind of first step. And then we'll use those to do future projections of regional marine ecosystems. That's the EcoPath with EcoSim part. And then evaluate the fisheries management implications and develop an operational framework for cross-regional application. So how do we take a framework for doing the first three and then make it so that it can be kind of plug and play and used everywhere and kind of accessible? And I'll say, like, it's not an explicit goal of this project, but as a person who works within FishMIP, which is an international effort, it's really important for me and a lot of people in FishMIP. How do we make these tools accessible globally to the global south, to everyone, everywhere? So that's always in the back of my mind. So this first objective, and that's what we're focus on here at LSU, are to identify the critical ocean processes for specific regions and species. So each region and each type of fishery will have certain things that are really important. Like, I'm from the West Coast, and so upwelling is everything. The timing of upwelling, the spring transition, and then we have like, ENSO and PDO dynamics. And that really depends on where you are, and it depends on which fishery you care about. Do you care about the bottom, benthic fisheries, or do you care about pelagic fisheries? What processes are really critical? And then determining the usability of climate projections for the region and for representing those processes, and then disseminating that ocean model, climate ocean model output in some kind of way that's very user friendly for ecosystem modelers. And I will say a lot of this like builds on some of the ideas in this paper we did last year, which, it's a very friendly paper. And I'm going to go over this little flow chart a little bit. That was led by David Showman in Australia, demystifying global climate models for use in the life sciences. And, so the goal is how do people use these? And as a person who has reviewed proposals for NOAA, it's like a lot of people don't know how to use these. And it's important that as climate modelers like me, we reach out and be the experts that people can use to ask questions of. And I'm very committed to that. So in this paper, there's like a flow chart of what you do to kind of get through this process, starting with, define an expert, identify the model processes, like I just said, that are important for your system. Where do I find the data? How do I know that data is good for what I want to do it for? And how do I deal with uncertainty and evaluate all of that? So this is the kind of infrastructure we're building, and there's really a need for this, a very intense present need for this. So I talked about some of this already: bottom temperature, for example, seasonal dynamics. Another thing that's really important is river nutrient inputs. This is not something that climate or system models have had done very well in the past, and it's just something that's coming online right now. And so, and all of this, like, there needs to be a co-design process, right? Like, so I'm not going to know what's important in the Mid-Atlantic Bight, like I don't know anything about the Mid-Atlantic Bight, except it's like inside the Gulf Stream. There's probably a lot of interesting things I will learn about that from this project. And so you need to rely on local knowledge and local fisheries modelers. And that's always been the thing that, we're trying to bridge that gap between modeling and fisheries. Okay, next slide. And so once you figure out like what those critical processes that you need to resolve, then you have to figure out, does this model output I want to use to push my fisheries model, to integrate my fisheries model, does it do that? Does it have those? So part of that is model validation. Does the model represent those key processes? And then if it doesn't, we need to think about bias correction. And this is something we've been working on with FishMIP for the regional group especially, is how do we use observational and reanalysis based data sets to correct discrepancies. And there's a lot of details on this. It's easy with SST because we have satellite data of SST. It's much, much harder with bottom temperature. You have to use in situ observations, which are sparse, is based at time. And then it gets even harder when we talk about biological, like plankton biomass came up recently in the Southern Ocean work. We don't have we have satellite proxies. How do we deal with the uncertainty of the observations we're using to validate our models and to bias correct our models? So there's a lot of stuff to dig in there, and I think it's going to be really valuable for us to think about that as a community. And then the next thing is if you're not doing a regional model downscale. So that's what's brilliant about CEFI is, which is Roger Griffith's NOAA project that is taking these global ocean model climate projections and downscaling them with a higher resolution regional ocean model to get all of the processes that are important, like upwelling. But what if you don't have the capacity, the computer time, or the expertise to do that? What do you do? a lot of people will do statistical downscaling. And so then there's a whole thing of like, well, what are the best processes there? Can we automate that? How do we test when we need to do that? And how do we do it? What's the most effective way to do it? So right now, what we're working on in my lab is a literature review on this and starting to get at all of these methods and thinking them through. Okay, so then we want to develop this toolbox for ecosystem modelers. And the purpose of the toolbox is to equip ecosystem modelers with the tools to efficiently integrate and validate climate data in their models. So you don't have to take a whole big chunk of model output that you somehow figured out how to download from the internet. And how do I even like open this? So we have some kind of GUI, graphical user interface, portal that they can use to really make those assessments and get some training to make those assessments themselves. So that's part of standardizing this workflow for linking these climate models to biological and ecological models. And we've started doing this in FishMIP, and I'll show an example of that in a second. But we need to do more, and it's really only the beginning of this effort. And so the key features of such a toolbox or portal are having these code libraries where we have pre-built scripts for processing climate model data into usable format. So going from netcdf files, having a shapefile, being able to extract a region of interest and then get some kind of time series that you can then plug into your ecopath model, for example. And then validation modules, so automated tools for comparing model outputs to observational data sets, like what is the bias, what is the error. And I'll show an example of something that does that in a second too. And then visualization tools like interactive platforms for exploring the data, both in space and time, like having a map of the bias, having a time series. And so that's what's up with that. And then being able to take that and then download it. So being able to, extract the data you want, download it, like I said. But then the question comes up, where do we host these? Like, do we host it on the NOAA Data Access Portal? And this is kind of really connecting these ecosystem modelers with the great resources that we have here in the US, but they're not connected currently. So people don't have access and people don't know how to use them. So how do we bridge that gap? And that is, tutorials and documentation, webinars like this one, and national meeting workshops. And yeah, so high performance computing. And so I just wanted to show a couple different examples of in the that we use. So this is the FishMIP Regional Climate Forcing Data Explorer that Denise Fiero Arcos, I don't know how to say her last name. Denise has been coding up in the R-Shiny. And this is something we're using for our FishMIP regional modeling, our current protocol. And this is using, the link is down here if you want to try to put that in and play around with it. And so what it does is we're currently using a NOAA GFDL quarter degree resolution model that is forced by reanalysis. So it's like the best historical representation of the ocean we could find. It has nutrients from rivers. So this is coming out of Charlie Stock's group at NOAA GFDL. And you can extract data given a shapefile. So we have loaded in all of the shapefiles for all of the different regional modelers within FishMIP. And yeah, thanks for putting the link in, Claire. Great. And it does have some model validation in it too. So we're kind of asking, like, how can we hack this? How can we expand it? Is this the right way to go? And yeah. And so what's next? And then the inspiration for me is something called the International Ocean Modeling Benchmarking Project. And I actually want to, I think I have enough time to actually demo this. I'm going to stop sharing and demo this really, really fast. I think I have like a minute just to kind of, and if somebody wants to stick this in the chat as well. And this came out of, there's a land model benchmarking project, and this like revolutionized how well land models worked in Earth system models. And so if you click on one of these, and so there's like, it's all interactive, and it has all the different Earth system models, and it has scores for them. It has a bunch of plots. It has tons and tons of plots. It has something called a Taylor diagram, which encapsulates a couple different types of model performance indices. It has some time series. And this is all open source and on GitHub. This was put together out of Forrest Hoffman's group at the Department of Energy lab in Oak Ridge. So that is something I think is really inspiring, and we should think about how could we make something like this work for us in the fisheries modeling community. And I think Colleen's in the chat saying like, I think the same thing, and I've been telling people this. Okay. So that's the International Ocean Model Benchmarking Project. And there's a paper by Wei Fu. And it's kind of like, I don't think anybody's currently working on it. So it kind of needs to be picked up and run with. Okay. So this is just kind of my pitch, like Vivian, but like Viv was saying, like, if you have expertise in this, I would love to hear from you. And I think this project is just beginning, but I want to start putting together kind of a panel of experts and talking to people. And so if anybody has suggestions or ideas, would love to discuss it and have a virtual coffee date with you. But I want to talk for a few minutes about the rest of the projects. This is just the first part, is all of that model data part. And so the next part is David's part, which is taking EcoPath with EcoSym. I found an old Jeff Pulvania, I think, plot of this. And so we want to use the existing marine ecosystem models he has set up for the Gulf of Mexico, Southeast Atlantic, and then plug all of this climate model input in there, and then analyze the species deaths, run the marine ecosystem models. And then how do we translate that into fisheries management? This is a theme you're hearing today, and a theme we're all working on. So we simulate the combined effects of climate and fishing pressure, assess species productivity, and propose adaptive management strategies, highlight uncertainties in climate scenarios and their management applications. This is exactly the kind of stuff Viv was talking about. And I think the point of this project is, how do we think about that in general, rather than, so we're going to use a specific region building off what David already has as a starting place, but we want to develop like a whole infrastructure for how to do this everywhere. Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah, so creating a decision support tool for fisheries management. So we have our toolbox for ecosystem modelers, but then having these decision support tools. So there's a lot of overlap between all of these projects, between Becky and Safi and what we're doing. And it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of all of these and how we're going to synergize this. I think it's going to be really fun to have a bunch of people working on this in parallel. I had AI make this from the help me make this talk from the proposal. So it has all these extra slides, which I think are kind of redundant. So that's what that is. And then the broader impacts, is we're really trying to get community support, right? Like, we want to support fishers. We want to support having food. We want to support the ecosystems in surviving the future climate. And this, is through enhancing NOAA's capacity to forecast and manage marine resources here in the US, and then set an example of how to do that well and give people tools to do that globally. So in conclusion, this is important. We're going to make tools. We want to collaborate with everybody, and, it's an exciting time. This is another AI generated image of our project. There's fish flying around in space. So thank you very much. And I will have any discussion.